Oh, my hair. Welcome back, Cory.
Your hair looks great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is that what you said, your hair or your ear?
No, the headphones were
Because that is something when we put these headphones on and our ear, just the one ear pops up.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned that to us the other day.
You hear better that way. You know what? I just want to let you know, since you're recording this afternoon, I want you to know that the wardrobe change is important.
It's working?
Someone texted me and said, just commenting on the humor of the wardrobe change. And their question was, does Brian really own that many white shirts?
It's not that you own that many. You have a few that you just wear all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like 3 or 4 that's just constant cycle.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Einstein wore the same thing every day.
Really?
You didn't know this?
Jesus probably mostly did too.
Yeah. Well,
but you look to who you look to. I look to who I look to. It's cool. That's fine.
Do you know why Einstein did it?
Just one less thing to decide in the morning.
Yeah,
man.
Less brain power, man.
So speaking of less brain power,
black jeans and Henley every day.
That's less brain power, no doubt. So if you're listening to this, it's still, well, if you're listening to it as it comes out,
if you're listening to it the day it is released,
it's still 2024.
I think so.
Okay, cool. Like, it's end of the year.
That's true.
We're trying to figure out, we're getting a couple of recordings in.
A lot of people are like, I'm not listening to this until next year. I'll catch up later.
And we don't even know what we're doing in terms of when things are necessarily released. Lissa does a great job. She knows. You probably know too. I don't know anything. But I do know this, Brian, that for whatever reason, people liked this one particular episode that we did this past year.
Spotify told us.
Yeah, was that today that Spotify told you?
I think it was yesterday or the day before.
Okay, cool. And that was this idea, this title, this episode around the 9 paradigm shifts. If we want to start thinking like movement missionary, like disciple making, movement-minded people that think a little differently than maybe the paradigms of church that we've all grown up in. And maybe that was a popular episode because it was like succinct. It was like, sometimes people do well with like, don't think this, but think that, it's like it's a bang for your buck type of thing. But it got us thinking, right?
Oh, you wanted me to pick up there. Sorry,
yeah.
I looked down at my shoe to make sure I didn't shake this thing that was holding my computer.
I'm just glad.
Okay.
My words were so compelling. Sorry, you're talking to me.
Yes.
I'm trying to move my microphone.
We basically said, hey, that was an important episode. If a lot of people listened to it and shared it, it was significantly more than any of the other episodes that we released. So it's like, hey, maybe we should go back and do a series on that. Mm-hmm. So it's not like a clean thing where we can jump in January 1 and start a series. But also we realized not a lot of people listen to this the day it comes out. Yeah.
Right.
So here's what we're doing. Over the next, I don't know, probably 3 to 4 months. And who knows, if we get distracted, it'll be longer. We're going to jump into these 9 shifts. Sorry. Your picture down there.
What picture?
Like where it shows you. Oh, you don't have it on yours.
I don't know what you're talking about.
It's just a funny picture that it grabbed. All right, back to the topic at hand. We're going to record some episodes on these 9 shifts, like focusing on each one of them individually, because we did that episode. A lot of people listened to it and it's like, all right, let's get deeper into each one of these. But we had also sort of committed already to, we want to interview hub directors in Kansas City so that you can hear more of the flavor of these 10 different hubs that exist in our network, are equipping ordinary disciple makers and micro churches. Because we've told stories of disciple makers or micro churches, but we haven't focused on that part of our network that is like, this is the organizational side that equips these people, and they're unique as well. So we're going to sprinkle these in together. So if you're like, I'd like to listen to the series that's just on these 9 shifts, then head over to our YouTube page, because we'll categorize them and put them in a folder that's like, hey, here are the 9 shifts.
Man, you guys are smart.
If you're like, I just want to hear about the hubs, and we'll try to, mention this here and there. Like, we do have the podcast categorized over there, so you can go sort of find what you want. But the other truth is, you know what? We're just going to release stuff, and we hope it's helpful for you.
Let's
and
not
you enjoy
overthink this. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of who we are. At the same time, we're trying to embrace some level of, I don't know, organization and vision.
We're trying to be helpful.
But at the same time, it's like, it's like we get enough good feedback. This is worth continuing to do. But at the same time, it's not our main focus. But we do think stories are important. I'm going to be honest, Brian. Can we be honest with everyone?
I mean, we haven't been lying yet.
The reason why we don't have as many stories, there's a handful, is one, it's a lot harder to schedule.
Yeah.
Like, we got this time during the week that we record. Most people with normal jobs, it's hard to do that. And then we've got families in the evenings, and we got all these activities. So we would record more stories of ordinary people, but ordinary people have jobs and their ordinary schedules. So that's just a reality for us. So we're going to we would tell more stories otherwise.
There's also the reality of, it's hard to tell these sometimes.
Yeah, that's the other one. That's the one we usually tell people.
Yeah, you don't want to like just throw this stuff up too early.
Yep.
And you don't want to
100%.
betray people's confidence, and we don't want to make people feel like projects either. But we do have some stories that are coming this year, or next year, or
there's
depends
just
on
good
when
stuff.
you listen to this.
Yeah. There's just good stuff happening, man. It's happening on every level.
All
so
right.
we're encouraged. It's for us. I feel like we're like, I don't know, that we're like pondering the past. We're like reminiscing because it's the end of the year.
That's true.
Right. When you listen to this, it may not be the end of the year, but there are good things that we've journeyed through a lot as a network in this past year, and there's things we're looking forward to in the future. That all being said, these paradigm shifts is actually language that we've sat in for years. Right. Like, I mean, this specific language. However, I'm actually writing an article right now because for us.
Oh, okay.
Because I remember a meeting a while back, and Alyssa said, like, I mentioned that, like, we were talking about these paradigm shifts and people were asking about it. I was like, would it be helpful if I just wrote like a little article? And Alyssa looked at me and goes, yes, content. Always looking good for content, I guess. So I'm like, my mind has been on this in the last 48 hours too, of these 9 paradigm shifts. And welcome back, Brian.
Hey,
thank you. Walked off screen, changed, and look, a white shirt. And to answer your question, yes, it's the same one he was probably wearing whatever last episode you saw. So let's dive into some of these. And again, it's not new content. It's revisiting things that we talk about often.
That's what I wanted to say earlier.
You're
Yes.
welcome.
We don't do a whole lot of new. We talk a lot about what is simple and reproducible. Mm-hmm. So we're not trying to come up with new content every week that is like, oh, here's the new thing that will help you multiply disciples. It's
we are, but we can't figure it out. So, no,
it's about repeating what is true and what is working. So here we are, almost 8 minutes in, finally getting to what you were here for. Let's talk about the first shift. Do you remember what it is?
I remember what it is.
Why don't you share it?
Well, the language we have used is like, we don't think about like that human strategy is the power. Or I would even say, don't think, human power or human strategy or big programs or big personality is the power.
Right.
Which is we tend to lean on, but rather think and go all in on, put all your eggs in the basket, that extraordinary prayer and fasting is the power. That is something that I think most believers and most people who want to engage in a reproducible disciple making agree in principle. But that mindset shift is so important to state before anything else, that we have to kind of get to that point where we're praying, and that's where the power comes from, and we got to get to the point we actually believe that.
Yeah. So when we train around the missionary pathway, and we always say phase 1 is prayer and fasting, and you never leave phase 1. It's all about phase 1, prayer and fasting. And we always say extraordinary prayer and fasting precedes movement. Prayer precedes movement. And I'll always throw in there, when we talk about movements, we talk about them globally and historically.
Yeah.
So let's kind of get grounded there. When we say globally and historically, what do we mean that prayer precedes movement? Well, one thing is a biblical, grounding here, a biblical stand. It's our foundation to go look at the life of Jesus. So let's always go there. The man is always praying. Whenever you're looking for Jesus, I always say, whenever you're looking for Jesus in the Gospels and you can't find him, he's probably off praying through the night somewhere. Yep. And I don't mean you as in you're looking for him. I mean, if people are like, hey, where's Jesus? Usually the response is, he was praying in the hills, or he's alone in prayer. The disciples in the upper room, what were they doing? They were praying and waiting on the Lord. They're being obedient to what Jesus told them to do. So there's a biblical framework for this. There's a biblical foundation. And I would say, again, when we're going through these, we're trying to hit these harder for our own sake. You know, like I'm looking into next year going like, what does it mean for me to increase in prayer and fasting? So there's that biblical grounding. And then we say historically, what do we mean by historically we see prayer preceding movements? One of the ones that I like to bring up often are the Moravians.
Oh, yeah.
So the Moravians are this group of people that are gathered in Eastern Europe. I believe Eastern Europe. It's like a Romania area, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's like Czech Republic nowadays, right? I think that's that area. So yeah, Eastern European.
Zachary that we interviewed this year will definitely
let
us know.
Yes, it's have like trying to remember the my church history, while simultaneously Googling it and Chat GPTing it as you talk. So keep going.
So the Moravians gathered for 24/7 prayer for 100 years.
It's crazy.
Which is nuts. You know, like we were just talking before the podcast, we're celebrating. There's a couple of different groups here in Kansas City that for the last 20 years have been praying extraordinarily 24/7 prayer. And if you put both of them together, right, and count it all, there's still like less than half of the years of the Moravians.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
And now there's a global movement of that. Like you can still follow the Moravians, track with them and pray in that. But like that's a historical movement. They sent hundreds, thousands of missionaries globally from this movement as they're like hearing from the voice of the Lord,
every part of the world,
and being sent on mission. Yeah. So the Moravians are all over the world. You probably heard maybe of the Welsh revival. So this is another movement that is a historical sort of ended up as a missions movement that begins in a prayer movement. So we've got like all of, and like go global now, Cory. Like what's the...
Yeah, I mean, that's like, dude, you could reference a few weeks ago, we interviewed Upaz and just his prayer journey and his heart for prayer. But yeah, that is that consistent thread that we see within movements is these people who just pray like with this passion and this desperation. That what we mentioned, what Upaz and I talked about was this overlap, this mixture of desperate prayer and authoritative type of prayer. Like these disciple making, they're just pleading. They're just pleading hours upon hours upon hours. Like I'm not joking, like hours that God would show up, that he would move. They're pleading and they're desperately crying out. At the same time, they're sitting in this posture of like sent ones that God has given authority over this place. And so there's also declaring the truth of God, right? And this declarative prayer that we talk about a lot, that mixture, like it is extraordinary.
And you just got back from East Africa.
Yeah.
So as I was spending some time doing some research before this episode, like where is extraordinary prayer happening? It mentions disciple making movements in East Africa.
Brilliant.
And I know you're interviewing those that, so
yeah, our team will be
releasing about the same time as this one will, like without giving too much away so they can talk about it. Like what's the feel in East Africa when you're there in November? Like, I know you're not sitting in these prayer rooms necessarily, but like,
yeah, I mean, it's so I'm trying to, I don't want to go into too many details, even where we're at. But like it's dispersed, if that makes sense too. It doesn't seem overly programmatic always.
Yeah.
There is intentionality. But it's people who have a reason to be in these certain communities, and they come in the power of God. And there's a desperate reliance. I don't know if that's the right word. Desperate faith that comes with their prayer. That's one thing that stood out to me. Right, I've heard a story of a guy who was basically, he was cross-cultural missionary. He was African of a different country going to South Sudan. Right. And just this unbelievable, but very believable story that I'm sitting and I'm just hearing him talk about how he felt called to this very specific tribe, pretty hostile. And there was, he was supposed to meet somebody in Uganda, says he's not from Uganda. He was supposed to meet someone in Uganda and he was supposed to kind of take him over there. Person doesn't show up. So they're just desperately crying out to God. And so it's him, and I think he had two partners with him, and they mention the name of this tribe that they're trying to get connected to. And this dude turns around, he goes, and he speaks English, right? and it's like the second or third language for all of these people, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
English, so they're all talking in English, and he's like, "That's my tribe." So he becomes this person of peace that actually ushers this team in, and so now they have many I don't know many. It's still early on within a year or two, but there are generations of disciples that are coming, and this particular guy will go in 3 or 4 times a year. He's already raised up a team, right? But it was this simple faith that expressed itself in just this miraculous crying out, God, we have no other option.
Yeah.
Like, we're screwed here. Like, if you don't show up. And not only does he show up, but he shows up with the exact person, the only person that could get them to fulfill kind of the calling that God has put on their lives. Like literally the only person or type of person is someone who came from this small area in a different country, who happened to be in the exact same spot at the same time as theirs. I mean, it's just like that kind of stuff. It just blows my mind.
Yeah. I feel like we do need to do that episode on like what happens out here in the spirit world.
Oh yeah.
You know, and like explore some of those biblical passages of like what is moving when we pray. Well, let's do this. Let's make a shift into this question that like is sort of always lingering when you go, don't think human strategy. And again, we talked about this. It's not that human strategy is bad.
Right.
It's that we shouldn't lead with it.
Yeah. That's the power ain't going to come from there.
Right.
Yeah.
But as we go, like think extraordinary prayer, the question that is begged is, what makes it extraordinary? What moves prayer from ordinary? And you know, it's like, let's be careful here not to go like, we're not shaming anyone and going, oh, you're just an ordinary prayer. You know? But like, how can we think about moving from ordinary to extraordinary? So we're gonna hit just 3 F words. Whoa, this podcast just got explicit.
All right. It's actually just 3 ideas, but we start with like effing.
I have to click that button that says this is an explicit podcast. So the ideas here are
effing frequency,
frequency, focus, or fervor. Which one of these words, frequency, focus, or fervor, do you think makes prayer move from ordinary to extraordinary? Now, let that question linger, so Cory. Good. Before you answer it, I'm just going to give you like some quick ideas.
Yeah.
When we say, when we talk about frequency, so people go, what makes prayer ordinary or extraordinary? Is it frequency, focus, or fervor? Frequency would be like, do I have to do this 24/7? Focus would be like intentional and specific, and I'm naming very specific things. So it's like really directed, laser focused. Or is it fervor, where it's that desperation that you're talking about? You know, so what makes it ordinary or extraordinary? Frequency, focus, or fervor?
Yes.
Or is it an E word?
I
don't know. I'm just kidding.
Every one of those. No, I mean, it's like I think of it. I mean, like I'm seeing in my brain like that whole like 3 strands woven together.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't know if it's like, you know, you do this one thing and it's extraordinary, but there is I do actually love these words, this breakdown of these 3 types of things, because those things get woven together.
That's a really great metaphor.
Like you see that, like you see that picture of what extraordinary prayer is. Like, because I'm thinking like all of these, even both in our network and the stories that come up, the stories throughout history, the stories around the world, like frequency. I mean, that is a scriptural thing, right? I mean, there are times of day, right? There is like commitment over a time, you know, weeks, months, years, to cry out to God, right? And like just that idea, like the way in which Jesus talks about like hearing prayer like that's the person who just cries out over and over and over again, and finally it's just like, you know, because you keep, you know, bugging me. I'm gonna, you know, just like
the parable of the unrighteous judge, where it's like, just keep coming back. Keep knocking on that door.
It's that. There's 2. There's the other one about verse. It's like because this person continually knocking. I'm not going to answer. It's so interesting. We need to find that scripture. Because I'm blanking on exactly where it is, but it's not even painting the person who answers the door in a good light. It's funny. It's more just like it's hyper focused on like the frequency
Mhm.
I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep knocking. I'm going to keep knocking. Eventually
Yeah,
that door's
it's
going to.
all three of them. Yeah, it's definitely all three of
Oh
those
yeah,
right
yeah,
there.
yeah, totally.
It's like a
Yeah.
continual knocking. It's focused on, I'm bringing this thing to you. I need you to move in this way. And I think we should look up that
It's a
story.
parable. We have someone's
And there's
coming
like
on
passion.
behalf of their friend. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
they're
there's
trying to.
passion behind
Yeah,
it.
so it's like I do think that frequency idea is huge. What's that? Daniel's the same way, right? That picture we see of Daniel in Scripture and just the daily rhythm of prayer.
Yeah. Hannah, we talked about that story where she's like begging for a son, like, give me a child, and the priest thinks you're drunk and you need to, and she's like, no, I'm not, like, this is like the cry of my soul. And you think I'm going crazy or whatever over here. Like, there's nothing wrong with me except that I want God to move in this way in my life.
Yeah, that's like the fervor side, right? That passion side. But when we talk about focus, we've often said it, and you make fun of me for being overly violent in my metaphors,
Right.
but we do talk about sniper prayer.
Yeah.
Like it's like focusing in. Who are the people that God has called you to? What?
I'm just like thinking that stands out to you, that I make fun of you for being violent.
Because we compare, like, always think sniper, not shotgun. We talk about it in mission, in context, and in prayer. So it's like I can laser focus in on where God's calling me, the people, the places, the faces, and there is an intentionality to that. There is a focus that goes beyond, God, if this is your will.
Yeah.
I do think there is a place for in the air prayer versus on the ground prayer, right? No doubt about that. But I think as we see movement and extraordinary prayer, there's a specificity of people and places and faces.
Yeah.
And that's always been the case.
Well, let's talk about like some prayer rhythms for a few minutes, because I think that takes those three ideas of frequency, focus, and fervor into, like, how do you do this practically? Yeah. Because while you were saying that focus piece, I was thinking that's why we do Bless 5.
Yeah.
And you can go find an episode on Bless 5. I don't know where that one is. Sorry.
Just search. That's why there's search bars.
Yeah.
All right.
So this is one of those tools that's like, use the Bless 5 for the sake of focus. Pick these 5 people, pray for them 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week, 5, 5, 5.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one way to get focused. It's also frequency. And then as God is moving your heart, there's that fervor thing that's like, I really want you to move in these. That's why I keep bringing them to you. Another tool that comes to mind is prayer walking. Just beginning to move around the geographical space that God has you in. And it may not be geographical. I mean, your context might be online gamers. And how do you prayer walk that space? I don't know.
Yeah.
You do, though, if that's your thing.
Literally had a conversation with a local friend this week about
how to prayer walk.
It's like, what does that look like in these different communities, these gaming communities? And he thought, he was like, there are usually spaces, even though it's mostly digital, where maybe people might gather.
Yeah.
So that's a prayer walk. But you can do a digital prayer walk.
Yeah.
That's a thing.
Yeah. Just like, what is it, these tools that you can think through to go, like, how can they help me focus my prayers and increase the repetition of them? And cultivate. I think it's more about cultivating the fervor. You know what I mean? That, like, we don't always start there, but like the longer that we're engaged and asking God to move in that, it's like also invite him to cultivate that fervor in you.
Mm-hmm.
Be broken for something, like be praying for him to move your soul in the same way that his is moved in that.
And that's the irony. When you do that, you get more of the heart of God in that. So it's like,
because that's the point of the prayer. Not that God would change his mind, but that he would change yours.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Like that is simultaneously 100% true. While at the same time we cry desperately that God would move in an area. Well, usually he's already working in us to even pray those prayers, right? So it's just like, and then your mind goes crazy. So that's why we want to talk about free will versus.
That is not where we're going.
Predestined. Okay.
So those are some practical ideas on this. And it's so, in some ways, so cheesy. And in some ways is what makes it so memorable. Like, I remember I think it was David Hinman. It was at Westside. for that DMM conference
Yeah.
where he made the comment, if you want to go from ordinary to extraordinary, just add one extra thing. And now your ordinary prayer is extraordinary. And when it becomes ordinary, just add one extra thing. And it's like, just keep trying new tools. And don't, they don't all have to be intercessory. They don't all have to be authoritative blessing. They don't all have to be new prayer walking styles or whatever.
Right.
Sorry, this humorous in my head of that like jazz walking thing. Anyway,
if you want a glimpse into Brian's brain,
like one of the contemplative prayer practices that you can engage to listen more for what God is doing in your context. So just some practical rhythms. Let's hit one other idea real quick. Barriers to extraordinary prayer and fasting comes to mind.
Time, perceived time. I mean, it's almost the inverse of all the other F's that we were saying, you know, like there's not fervor, you know, there's not desperation, there's not frequency. I think maybe sometimes it's just even doubt.
Yeah.
Does this even do anything?
Yeah.
You know, am I just kind of like, is prayer just another like religious thing? Yeah.
You listening?
Yeah. It's just another religious thing. That's why testimonies of prayer is actually, I think, really stories of hearing God show up mightily through prayer has always been a significant thing for me, because I'm, you know, just like everyone else, I think there are seasons of just doubt.
Yeah.
It's like, is this even like, I don't live into this power.
Yeah.
Even though I know it's true. So stories do so much to help.
Yeah. And I think one of the things you're saying there also is just a burnout level. You know, like, and that's why those stories, that's how you overcome these barriers, barriers of doubt, barriers of burnout or time, is to hear other people that are saying like, man, I mentioned it on a podcast recently, but one of the last missionary pathway huddles I was leading, this young woman that was saying like, we're trying to get into the state prison to do this work and they're trying to shut us down. And like, you know, just praying like, God, what are you doing? When is the door going to be open? Praying into that. And then something happens in the state legislature, even the federal, I can't remember where it was, but it was like, oh, doors are open. You can come in, you can move in. And it was like a celebration of, oh, we were praying for that.
Yeah.
And something happened.
Yeah.
So the more we hear those stories where people are going, no, I leaned into this. I kept coming back.
Yeah.
I kept working on it, helps you overcome those like seasons of, is this working? Or man, I'm tired. You know, I want to lean into it, but I am tired.
Yeah. I think of also people, I don't know, people sometimes just don't even know how.
Yeah.
Like a barrier is like, I don't know how to pray. It is worth noting that Jesus literally said, like, taught people how to pray.
Yeah.
Like modeled it and said, hey, this is how you should pray. Because I do think sometimes people don't know. We usually learn how to pray by hearing others pray and being in that. Like it's actually, I still like, even the way in which I pray sometimes mirrors mentors in my life.
Yeah.
And isn't that crazy to I have John Schwartz, he's been on this podcast, right? Mentor in my life. I sometimes pray like him. The words that I say, you know, because we prayed together so much when I was in college, and there was a mentor, right? Like that's just, I think that's significant for the reason why we do trainings around this, and we have resources, and we've got podcasts and videos that come alongside these tools, is we want to just help train you to do it. Like, just try it.
Yeah.
It's not magic, but it does take some like trying. Even
in that story with Jesus there, it's like the disciples already prayed. That wasn't something that was unknown to them. Yeah. Like, I think they're coming to him saying, hey, we don't do it like you do it. Which is what you're saying, you know, like they're hearing something that's different, going like, I know I'm supposed to do this. There's some sort of something going, like they didn't just make up the prayer word. They knew it. They said, teach us to pray like you pray. In other words, we don't do it like that.
Yeah.
Help me like do it like you're doing it. And he is giving them a framework there. And I'm the same way. Like I'm seeing it repeated in my kids now too. Like when they pray about things, I'm like, oh, that sounds like me.
Yeah,
you know?
Totally, man.
Which is how it should be. Yeah.
And it does. Oh man. I think in some of the ways that we in the West have prayed, maybe that's why generation after generation we keep doing that. Like the more things that we have and the less desperation and fervor and frequency and all that stuff that is modeled for us, then the less we're probably going to live into it. And it's probably why so many movements are sparking other movements, right? Because the people, disciple makers, disciples emerging in these movements who've come to know Jesus in this way, like prayer is modeled for them in that kind of desperate way. Sometimes when you're places around the world where people don't have very much, but they have God, and you know, Americans go over there and that's the biggest takeaway. It's like they got nothing, but man, they know God in their faith. I think that's part of it, right? There's just a level of trust and dependency that is caught as well as taught. And I think sometimes people just don't know how to do it. And so sometimes it's caught. Sometimes it's like, okay, we also want to provide some tools to help you walk alongside it. Yeah. So that's one that jumped out to me too. Is something we just don't even know how.
Yeah. So just a quick summary of these things as we wrap up. I think this is helpful. Some notes here that we have. Prayer becomes extraordinary through frequency, focus, and fervor. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of cool to tease that out, see the way those three ideas are intertwined. Love how you pull that together. Mm-hmm. It's not about having to pray all the time, 24/7, mm-hmm. and you're not extraordinary if you're not doing it. It's like, no, absolutely increase in frequency, but also increase in focus. Mm-hmm. You know, how are you praying specifically, but also fervor? Are we cultivating that? Mm-hmm. So prayer becomes extraordinary through frequency, focus, and fervor. We need practical rhythms and tools to help us do that, to help us increase in frequency, focus, and fervor. And hey, barriers are normal. Like that's going to happen, but you can overcome that through continuing to focus on frequency, focus, and fervor, and hearing stories, sharing stories about what Jesus is doing as people come to him, as they pray, as they seek where he's already at work and join him in that.
Man, you seem so organized today.
I'm
notes.
Working on it. I got notes,
that.
man.
Is this like
we're going to try
this
in 2025.
I don't know what to do.
All right. Let me throw some ideas out there, though, because we're speaking of New Year's resolutions. I'll throw this out as sort of a wrap up. I'll put these notes in there. The first 18 weeks of 2025. So we wrote prayer guides ahead of time there. Quite a few of them are done.
Wow.
So we have these 18 prayer guides on the 18 values from our manifesto that we're going to pray into on Tuesdays. So as an invitation for all of you, but especially for those of you that are in Kansas City, Tuesdays are those days that we come together for prayer and fasting. So if you go to the website, kcunderground.org, I think down at the very bottom on that main page, you can put your name, email address in, and you get subscribed to the newsletter that goes out every week, but also this prayer newsletter. So you get these prayer guides dropped in your inbox every Tuesday. And just commit Tuesdays for 18 weeks. See what happens as you listen, as you pray into these values of movement. Mm-hmm. They're not just values of microchurches. It's like what defines our network. Some other apps, Bless app. So you can download the Bless app. It'll send you 5 neighbors to pray for every day. I know a lot of my friends at 10:02, their alarms go off because they're praying for Luke 10:2, send more missionaries into the harvest field. Yeah. What are some specific things as you walk away from today that you can go, Jesus, what's one thing you want me to add?
Yeah, that's good.
What's one way you want me to join you?
Another resource I'll throw out there that I think we have before is movementprayer.org. Movementprayer.org. So we mentioned David Hinman earlier, and a lot of good resources, some different regional prayer hubs and people group prayer hubs you can get connected to. So if you're in a different city, that might exist close to you. Movementprayer.org is a great one.
Or Monday mornings.
Yes.
Monday morning, 6:30 Central Time for half an hour. Just type in kcprayer.com.
That's right.
Open a Zoom room and you can pray with us.
Amen.
And we'd love to have more voices praying for gospel flourishing in that environment.
Amen. Good stuff, Brian.
Final thoughts?
Happy New Year. Merry Christmas.
Time stamped it. Think extraordinary prayer before you think human strategy.